Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace. Game number 3, Nicktoons Unites. Hey people, did you know that when I was growing up, I was a huge Nickelodeon kid? Well, I was. I spent a lot of my childhood watching shows like Rugrats, Doug, Rocko's Modern Life, Hey Arnold, and various other Nicktoons that were around during the early, mid, and late 90s. In fact, I think the only Nicktoon I absolutely detested and hated was Ren and Stimpy, so you could practically park me right in front of that television, put on Nickelodeon, and I would have been just fine for the rest of the day. That is, if video games weren't already doing that anyway. Nicktoons Unite was published by THQ in 2005 on a multitude of systems, with the handheld installments being developed by Climax Action, an incredibly raw and powerful sounding team name. This is also the first game in a series of Nicktoon games developed by this team, so we'll be coming back to this series periodically throughout this challenge. In fact, before I was aware of this being a series, we initially drew Attack of the Toybots for this particular game draw, but since I intend to tackle games progressively in this challenge, we're going to take a look at Unite first and come back to that a little later, after covering this game and its follow-up, since Toybots is apparently the third game of this franchise. Nicktoons Unite is basically what if the Justice League, but with Nicktoons instead. It's a conglomeration of different Nickelodeon IPs coming together to take on a common enemy, which in this case is just a team-up of the villains from their respective series. In the context of this game, we have the likes of SpongeBob SquarePants, the Fairly OddParents, Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, and Danny Phantom. Now, none of these series I mentioned earlier when I was talking about my history with Nicktoons, but I did catch a little of the waves of SpongeBob and Fairly OddParents before I completely stopped watching Nick, and did get some enjoyment from watching them whenever they were on. In fact, I even saw the Jimmy Neutron movie when it first released in theaters, since it technically started out as a movie before becoming a Nicktoon. Danny Phantom, though, yeah, I didn't have any experience with that, unfortunately, although I did watch a Let's Play of a Danny Phantom game by FireKitty back in the day, and thought it seemed interesting enough at least. Anyway, onto the plot for this game. Jimmy Neutron has developed a new invention, a universal portal machine, which allows him to make contact with a variety of other worlds that exist out there, most notably the dimensions of the other Nicktoon worlds represented in this title. Professor Calamitous, an antagonist of Jimmy's, gets a copy of this invention and starts using it for his own nefarious deeds, most notably creating a league of evil between him, Vlad Plasmius from Danny Phantom, Plankton from SpongeBob, and Denzel Crocker from the Fairly OddParents, and together they all intend to harness the energies from their different worlds and achieve world domination, I think? Something evil like that anyway. This forces Jimmy Neutron, SpongeBob SquarePants, Danny Phantom, and Timmy Turner to team up and work together to stop their villains from causing this chaos and save their worlds from certain doom. Nicktoons Unite is a 2D action-adventure game. You control a team of 2 characters at a time, at least in this game, and try to work through each level using your character's attacks and abilities to take down enemies and solve puzzles to reach the end of the stage. Getting to the end of stage is not enough though, as you also need to destroy 3 portal machines in every level, as well as collect 4 nanochips before the end of stage portal completely opens up for you, which turns each level into a bit of a scavenger hunt as well, in addition to just getting through it to the end. The 4 characters you control also have differences in how they attack and perform special moves. Danny and SpongeBob have a very basic projectile attack that they can aim in all directions, even when jumping, and Jimmy has the same projectile attack as well, but instead of doing damage with his, he can only stun enemies, allowing you to simply move through them without really engaging, potentially saving time as each enemy can take a number of hits before it goes down. Timmy does not really have much range at all with his standard attack though, but what he lacks in range he makes up for in power, as he has more of an area of effect attack that unleashes a shockwave of magic that pretty much takes out any standard enemy in one shot. perfect if you just want to get rid of your foes for good without having to worry about them lingering around. And usually the enemies will drop health refills as well, so you really don't need to worry about taking damage from getting too close either. This honestly made Timmy feel like the most ideal character to play with in the normal stages, if I'm being honest. Timmy Turner broken and needs nerfed? Apparently so. The heroes also have special abilities that they need to utilize to get around the levels. Jimmy can use a jetpack to hover up to really high places, and Timmy, using his fairy godparents! Sorry about that. Had something stuck in my throat. He can have them turn into balloons that will carry you up higher, pretty much performing the same function. Denny can use his trademark Go Through Walls ability, although he can only do it on specific surfaces for some reason, and SpongeBob can shorten himself to squeeze into areas that other characters can't get into. Yeah, I think they ran out of ideas for old Spongy, I guess. All these abilities, with the exception of SpongeBob's, have a power meter associated with them, and you can only use them if your meter isn't empty. However, there's usually a restock around if it's required for something, so don't worry about running out of juice, unless in one very specific instance I'll talk about later. Now, I mentioned earlier about using only 2 characters at a time, and yes, at one given time you can only have 2 characters on the field. However, throughout the levels you can find a teleporter that you can use to switch between characters if you need them. Kind of like the tag barrels from Donkey Kong 64. You can also press the L button to switch between your 2 active characters, something you will have to do in-game if you need a character to stand on a switch, or use a special ability to unlock further progression in one direction. I feel like if you were going to use this system though, I would have probably just preferred having the ability to just switch between all characters on a dime, because going back to the character teleporters can be quite tedious. And just a reminder, you need both characters with you if you want to switch, so don't take too much of a detour backwards unless you have your teammate with you, or you may have to go back to retrieve them, adding more time to your backtrack. The character switching just felt kinda clunky and tedious to me, and I think I would have just overall just preferred stages not being tied to that design, and more to the characters who are part of that world instead, like forcing SpongeBob to be the main character in the Bikini Bottoms world, with maybe the option of having your teammate character be one of the other 3, and allow that other character the option to switch if needed, if that makes sense. Maybe the other version of this game used this design better, but here there was a lot to be desired for sure. World 1 is the Danny Phantom world, and it's a pretty decent opening set of stages that really show you how this game is going to work moving forward, and gives you your basic objective of how each stage will function, in regards to finding and destroying all the enemy portals and collecting all the nano chips. It was as early as level 2 though when I realized one major annoyance of this game: missing something along the way. If you miss a collectible, you will have to backtrack for it if you make it to the end of the stage with not all of your objectives done, and depending on where it is, you could be going back really far. Any doors you needed to have a character wait on a switch for, you'll have to do that again. And let me also tell you, this game does not have a run button, so your characters will not be moving very fast at all either. Sometimes just retracing my steps in these levels took more time than actually getting through the levels themselves, and it almost made me wish at least one of these objectives were optional, because the backtracking was not very fun at all. After beating 2 levels in each world, the 3rd stage is actually a boss fight with that world's main antagonist, so in World 1 we had to take down Vlad. Vlad wasn't too hard, you just needed to shoot him and his clone from a distance, and simply move out of the way if he fires at you. Pretty standard first boss of the game, not really that hard at all. World 2 is Bikini Bottom, the SpongeBob SquarePants world, and is pretty much more of the same. I did appreciate this world a lot more though as an old SpongeBob fan, and it oozes a lot of personality from the show. Level 1 even has you going inside SpongeBob's house, and Level 2 is the Chum Bucket, which makes it feel like you're navigating through a large fast food burger joint with flipping patties you must use as platforms, and ketchup dispensing obstacles as well. It was a really cool world, not gonna lie. Although, I did once again miss a collectible on Level 2, so I had to backtrack once more. Ugh, fun stuff, right? Plankton was also another easy boss fight, where all he does is jump around a few times, and then sends enemies after you. I suppose that's really all the small fry can do, but still, would have been nice if he was a little more intimidating. I actually had a pretty decent time with the next world as well, which was Dimsdale from the Fairly Odd Parents. It even has a nice jazzy theme to go along with the level as well, which made it a good time. I could definitely start to feel the levels growing in complexity as well, which made them feel a bit longer and made character switching even more prevalent. Although, funnily enough, I feel like I had the least amount of trouble finding stuff in this world, which was a nice change of pace. The boss of this world was obviously Crocker, and I think he was actually the most annoying boss of the game. He's not really much of a threat, as he actually spends most of the battle hidden inside of a locker before jumping out and firing a projectile. But he has a crony named Negatimmy that just kinda walks around and annoys you, and also gets in the way of your own projectiles, which was a bit tedious. I actually ended up taking my first death in this fight, and this was when I realized something incredibly important about this game. You can't actually lose. Yeah, there are no lives in this game, you just respawn with all of your health back and can keep going until the game is done. In a regular level, you would also get sent back a little, but none of your stage progress would get undone. Your biggest penalty is quite literally the most minor inconvenience. That's really going to tank the difficulty rating of this challenge, huh? After Crocker goes down, we just have one more villain left, and that's Professor Calamitous himself in the Jimmy Neutron world. This world was easily the most tedious of the game. Definitely the most complex stage design, and the second level is quite literally a massive maze with lots of buttons and switch puzzles, and all the stage objectives hidden in the most random and dead ends. I wouldn't say it's the hardest thing in gaming or anything close to that, but definitely the most tedious level to get through in a game that was already pretty clunky to get around to begin with. In fact, it actually took me almost 50 minutes to get through this stage, but in my defense, this was not a fault of mine, but instead of the game developers. You see, at a certain point in the level, you and your teammate fall down a really high pit after going through a switch door, and the only two characters that can get back up the drop down are Timmy and Jimmy. At the bottom here, there's a balloon power-up that replenishes Timmy's magic meter, but there's nothing here for Jimmy at all, which means if Jimmy uses too much of his jetpack, he can't actually get back up the drop down, and since you need both characters to get through the switch door, there is actually no way to backtrack, and you are completely soft-locked if you missed a collectible early on in the level. And guess what I did here? After stumbling around the second part of this area and not finding any way back, I had to restart the entire level from scratch, and sure enough, the collectible I missed was at the very beginning of the stage. Feels bad, man. When I finally beat the level, thankfully, our adventure was just about over, as we just had to beat Professor Calamitous to end the game. Really, he wasn't even that threatening. You just keep attacking him a few times, then he summons one of the previous bosses to fight you again, in pretty much the same way as before, and then you pretty much repeat the process until he's defeated. It's really that simple. With the League of Evil's plans fully thwarted, the balance of the universe starts to return to normal. But in an effort to keep the universes at peace, Jimmy gives the other three heroes neutronic recallers so they can all be summoned together again and fight off evil if need be. Sounds like the most perfect way to set up a sequel cash grab, huh? Anyway, game complete. So, overall, what did I think of Nicktoons Unite? Well, I didn't hate it. It was slow, it was clunky, and I wish it would have handled and worked a bit differently than it does. But for the most part, I thought it was fine. If anything, it got me more interested in the console versions, as I'm sure the limitations of a handheld system probably didn't do this game any favors, and not just mechanically, but also in the sense of the game's visuals as well. Let's just say some of the characters and models don't look too good, and considering that not all IPs use the same art style and animation, some characters look better than others. The actual backgrounds themselves, though, weren't too bad, but when you add the character sprites to them, things really started to clash in my opinion. Also, and again, this was likely due to the limitations of this version of the game, but during the in-between gameplay cutscenes, instead of showing the characters interacting with each other, we just simply get a simple image slideshow of each character when they're talking, and text at the bottom of the screen for the dialogue. Not a very exciting way to tell the story, admittedly, but hey, it was on the Game Boy Advance, I get it. Obviously more resources went towards the console versions, but still, it definitely made the game seem less like video game and more like a 6th grade PowerPoint presentation. The music, though, was actually pretty good and very appropriate for the stages and levels each tune appeared in. It seriously felt like they put more effort into the game's music than the actual gameplay and presentation, strangely enough. But yeah, that was pretty much my adventure of beating Nicktoons Unite. In terms of enjoyability, I'm giving it a 2.5 out of 5. It had something that could have worked well, but its clunky nature, repetitive gameplay, less than ideal visuals, and even the massive developer oversight I experienced definitely brought this score down for me. And in terms of difficulty, I joked during the playthrough about giving it a 0 out of 5, since you literally can't lose, but I'll stick with 1 as the lowest rating, because you did have to at least play the game to get through it. I'll save zeros for literally instances where you can do nothing and still win the game, assuming there is anything like that on this system, which, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. So with that, we're going to move on from our classic Nicktoon friends for now, but this will not be goodbye forever, as we still have Battle for Volcano Island and Attack of the Toybots to look forward to for future follow-ups to this mini-series. Not to mention, some Nicktoon IPs have their own individual games on here too, so we will surely see those as well. Anyway, here's a sneak peek of the next game we'll be playing for this challenge. Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.